All right, today we are going to start talking about proofs for congruent triangles. This is going to be a really important topic. We are only going to do one or two new things, but it is going to bring everything that we've been talking about for the past couple of weeks. All of those ideas are going to all connect together here. So all the vocab we've been practicing, all of the different methods for congruent triangles, all the different ideas about transformations, all the different ideas about the types of statements. I introduced the ideas of proofs. All of those different ideas are going to kind of connect together in what we're doing over the next week or so. So let's take a look at how these are structured. I'm going to start by the more typical way that a geometry textbook is going to show these proofs, which I had mentioned before, which is this more two-column structure. So we're going to do that for the first proofs, and I'm also going to show it in a more explained and complete sentences in a paragraph structure. So here's the idea. Let me break down what we have. A to B congruent to C to B. This is the given information. This is the information that I am telling you. This is the information that you are getting for free. And the idea is that using this information and other things you know, other vocabulary you know, other things from the diagram, knowing this information should be able to lead you to the conclusion of the thing you were being asked to prove, the thing next to prove. So it should lead you to the conclusion that these triangles are congruent. And we're going to prove the triangles are congruent using one of these methods that we had talked about. Side, 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 angle, side, and so on. So let's take a look at how this looks in a two-column way first. First step is that A to B is congruent to C to B. That is given. That is given. Anytime you have something that you are just copying from the given information, word for word, in this two-column proof, your reason is going to be given. Because it is given to you, it is just repeating the information that you are given, which is this pair of sides right here. It's even marked in the diagram for you. For that reason, step 2 will also be, the reason will also be given. It will still be given because D is the midpoint of A to C is basically copy-pasted directly from the given information. So our reason there is also going to be given. Now, step 3 will not be given because it's not in the given information. We are going to use this piece of given information to give me a pair of sides or a pair of angles. That's the idea here, is that remember that to use one of the methods, we need 3 pieces of information. We always need 3 pieces of information. So because we need 3 pieces of information, right now, we just have 1 piece of information, which is that A to B is congruent to C to B. That gives us one of our sides. But this does not give us a congruent side. In order to give us a side, it should say directly, segment this is congruent to segment this. So this gives us a side, but this does not. Or to get a pair of angles, same thing, you would say angle this is congruent to angle this. So on this one, we need to use the fact that D is the midpoint of A to C to explain how we get from there to the segments being congruent. All right, so we are going to use that fact of a midpoint. What is a midpoint? bisects it, divides the segment, goes right in the middle. Get me from there to congruent sides. The two sides, in other words, the two halves, these two halves are going to be congruent. So we're going to list out what the two halves are, which are A to D and C to D, and we're going to say that they're congruent. And the reason that we're going to say is definition of midpoint. In other words, that is what a midpoint is. That is what a midpoint is. A midpoint divides the segment into two equal pieces. So we're going to list off that the pieces are congruent. This is another thing that you're going to see me do. You're going to see me write. Whenever we have a pair of sides or a pair of angles, you're going to see me mark that. So in parentheses here, I'm going to put an S because that tells me a pair of sides. In parentheses here, I'm going to put an S because that's a pair of sides. So to walk through that reasoning one more time, we have D as the midpoint of A to C. Here's A to C. Here's D at my midpoint. So the pieces that it's split into are here and here. Those two pieces have to be the same. There's my pair of sides. Raise your hand if you think you know what's going to go here as my reason that B to D has to be equal to B to D. What do you think? It is going to be a reflexive property. Because this side is a common side in both triangles, so it has to be equal to itself. That's the reflexive property. B to D is congruent to B to D. Hey, we have a statement that says segment this is congruent to segment this. So there's my third side. Ding, ding, ding. They're congruent. Which method did we use? We used side, side, side. So therefore, the triangles are congruent by side, side, side. Now, like I said, we can write it in this more complete sentence structure. And there's advantages and disadvantages to both ways. I think this might help it a bit more organized and see how the information flows. It is shorter. You don't have to write as much. However, it is more nitpicky. If you are writing it this way, then you have to write definition of midpoint in that exact phrase or it's wrong. Not so if you're just writing it out with complete sentences. You are more free to, as long as you explain midpoint and explain how that connects to the pieces being the same, then you have done what you are supposed to do. So here's how that same proof looks in a more paragraph structure. You do not have to write this down. Just read it and observe, follow along with the steps that we used, and kind of verify to yourself that this is the same proof, just written differently. We are given that segments A, B, and CB are congruent. Notice once again that I use that capital S to mark a side. To mark in parentheses, oh, I have a pair of sides. We are also given that D is the midpoint of A to C. And then I went on, this is step 2 into step 3, went on to explain how that connects to our pair of sides. It means that A to C is split into 2 equal pieces. Those pieces must be congruent. So I explain how I get from midpoint to those 2 sides being the same. Finally, D to B is a common side, so it must be equal to itself by the reflexive property. Again, I put side in parentheses to get my final side. Therefore, triangle ABD is congruent to triangle CBD. Regardless of which way you're doing it, the end of the proof should look like, here's my congruence statement. ABD is congruent to CBD. Notice I matched them up. A should match up with C, B should match up with B, D should match up with D. And then my reason was the method that I use, which was side, side, side. Both ways of doing it, my method was side, side, side. We're going to do another one here to give you some more practice with it. Once again, we're going to start with our given information. The typical flow of these proofs is that you're going to start with the given information, use each of them to figure out a side or an angle. Then, from there, after you run out of given information, you're going to use the diagram. You're going to look at the diagram and you're going to see if there's any information. So we're going to start with a given. We are given. Are we talking here about sides or angles? Sides. How many pairs of sides do we have? We've got 2. We are given 2 pairs of sides. And I'm going to list off what those pairs of sides are. So that's what this next part is. So there's my 2 pairs of sides that I was given. I'm going to put a side in parentheses because I just got a pair of sides. I'm going to put a side in parentheses because I just got another pair of sides. We're at 2 down, 1 to go. So now from here, I want to give you a minute and I want you to see if you can come up with what the third piece of information we're going to get is. And I want to see how you do with writing the sentence. So I'll give you a minute or 2. How many, raise your hands, how many spotted that this was going to be the reflexive property? Okay, reflexive property it is. That is correct. Here was my sentence. It does not have to be the same sentence as yours. It does not have to be the same sentence. Here's what you do need. You need 2 things. Same as in the 2 column, you need a statement and a reason. You need what is true and why it's true. What is true, you need to say the pair of sides that you are getting. The pair of sides that you are getting, you can say that by matching up what pair of sides it is. H to J matches up with what? J to H. Or you can say, which is what I said, that H to J is congruent to itself. That is also communicating the pair of sides, H to J and itself. That's the side that it matches up with. It matches up with itself. So that is what is true, why it's true. You need a reason. Now the reason, as we said, is reflexive property. But let's say that you're having trouble with remembering that. I had someone earlier today saying, oh, I forget what that thing is called. If you forget what that thing is called, then just describe it. You'll notice that I didn't say reflexive property here. You don't necessarily have to say reflexive property here or it's wrong. You can describe why reflexive property applies here. But you need to communicate reflexive property in some way. So I communicated reflexive property by saying that it was a shared side in both triangles. The quickest way to communicate reflexive property is by just saying by the reflexive property. You can also communicate reflexive property by saying that it's a common side. You can communicate reflexive property. I think I had someone saying that like this was the side that linked the 2 triangles together. That's also communicating reflexive property. So there's not just one way to explain this, but you should say this is the pair of sides that I'm using, and this is how I know that pair of sides. Finally, We have our three pieces of information. Therefore, we're going to write out the congruence statement. Remember, the end of the proof should, on almost all of these, the end of the proof should have the congruence statement, Hij is congruent to triangle JK. I said K and I wrote something else. KH. By, what's the congruence method we're using here? Side, side, side. Okay. And that is the end of our proof. So this is how these are going to look. Each pair of sides or angles we have need to be justified in some way with a reason. And I'm going to kind of split that up into what you're going to do for your homework tonight. So this is your homework that I'm handing out. We're going to go through a couple of problems together so that you can see what I'm looking for on these problems. Before I throw you full force into doing an entire proof from start to finish, we're going to start by practicing individual steps. So that's what you're going to do on this assignment, is you're going to take little steps at a time here. So what you're going to do for each diagram, there's a pair of sides or angles that can be marked congruent either from the given information or from the diagram. Write 1 to 2 complete sentences describing these sides or angles and the reason they can be marked congruent. So you're going to say what the pair of sides or angles are, and you're going to explain why. So let's do one. I'm going to do one of the harder ones with you so that you can see what you're going to be doing, and I'm going to do one of the easier ones. All right. 3 and 4 are using the same diagram here, so we're using this diagram over here. Here we go. The key to this one is to know what this symbol means, to make sure we know what this symbol means. And this is not one that I have like drilled into your head like reflexive property and midpoint, so I'm going to go over it. This symbol, this symbol over here means perpendicular. Okay, and I mentioned that word once or twice. Perpendicular. 2 lines being perpendicular means that when they cross, they make right angles. They make right angles. So that's going to be the key to this. Is that we're going to, again, our job is going to be to connect perpendicular with this pair of angles have to be congruent. That's what we need to show. We need to show that logical connection. Here we go. B to C is perpendicular to C to E. So I'm going to start the sentence first. With these 2 pairs of perpendicular lines, we know that, and remember, perpendicular lines make right angles. That's going to be the key here. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the right angles. First one, B to C is perpendicular to C to E. B to C is perpendicular to C to E. Here's B to C, here's C to E. If those 2 are the ones that are perpendicular, which angle is going to be the right angle? It's going to be angle C. Those are where the 2 lines are intersecting, so that's the angle that's going to be the right angle. take the other pair of perpendicular lines here and see if you can spot where the right angle is going to be. Trace them out, see if you can find the right angle. Where was the right angle? It's angle E. Here's F to E, here's E to C. The angle that's the right angle is angle E. So let's make sure those are congruent. What's the measure of angle C? 90 degrees, because it's a right angle. And what's the measure of angle E? How can we get the measure of angle E? What is it going to be? Oh, that's right, because it's a right angle again. Well, if they're both 90 and they're both measuring the same, that's what congruent means. It means they measure the same. So angle C is congruent to angle E. And just like I was doing in the notes, I'm going to, in parentheses here, put capital A, so that I know that I just got a pair of angles. That's your process on number 4. I have said what the pair of angles are. That's angle C and angle E, and I've explained how perpendicular tells me that. Next one. This one's going to be easier. This one's going to go quicker. No given information. If it says no given information, that probably means that you need to use something from the diagram. So look in the diagram and see if you can spot anything. Either a pair of sides that you know and a pair of angles, or a pair of angles that you know. And if you spot it, write out what they are and write out how you know. Raise your hand if you spotted them. What kind of angles? They're vertical angles. This was one that people had trouble with spotting yesterday. These angles right across from each other, vertical angles, and vertical angles are always congruent. So that's what we're going to say. We're going to say what those angles are. I'm not going to say angle M and angle M because they're two different angles. They're not the same angle, which is why it's not reflexive property, because they're two different angles. So I'm going to be specific about which angle M I'm talking about. LMK. And the bottom one is angle OMN. So those two angles are vertical angles. So they must be congruent. And once again, I'm going to, in parentheses, I'm going to put A because I just got a pair of angles. Done. So just to very briefly run down the rest of the directions. That's what you're doing. You should have a pair of sides or a pair of angles that you can get from the information. Put to the back. On the back, we're ramping it up a little bit. On the back, this time, you should be able to get two pieces of information. One from the given information. So, for example, on this one, it says E to G bisects angle FEH. So since angle FEH is getting bisected, you should be able to tell me a pair of sides or a pair of angles, and you should be able to explain why. Why does bisector tell me those angles? Then there should also be something in the diagram, probably either reflexive property or vertical angles, that you should be able to find as well. So you're going to be able to get two pieces of information, two different pairs of sides or angles that you can get congruent.